New York State finally has a budget voted into law 9 days past the deadline. Parts of that spending plan caused some tension in the Capitol and are still getting some pushback yet still this week. We're joined now live by political analyst Jack O'Donnell from O'Donnell and Associates. Jack, thanks for being with us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Let's start sort of globally with this year's budget. 9 days past the deadline. It looked like, particularly some of the downstate Democrats, they were pretty upset, or at least they said they were, by the fact that Governor Hochul included some last-minute items in this year's budget, namely bail reform and some other issues having to do with the Bills Stadium, which we'll get into in a minute. But I'm curious how you think this year's process compares with some years past.
Well, look, the process did obviously go late, right? 9 days late, but they passed an extender. No one missed payroll. At the end of the day, this isn't that unusual. Andrew Cuomo's first couple of years were absolutely on time, but I don't know, 6 out of the 10 were really what he called timely, which is right about where we are today. So not all that different than the status quo in Albany.
I'm curious what you think about the Bills Stadium being included in the budget. Of course, that was the expectation all along. So no surprise when that $600 million was included in it. Although you did start to see some downstate Democrats piping up about that, seemed to be a little concerned over that inclusion. Were they really actually concerned, do you think, or do you think they were trying to use that topic, the stadium funding, as leverage to try to get Hochul to move on bail reform and some other issues?
Well, I think it's a mix. I think it's something in between. I do think there are a number of state legislators who are genuinely dismayed that the state would spend that much money on a stadium. And that would spend that much money on an NFL stadium for billionaire owners who don't live in state. So I do think they were concerned about it. Was that really going to hold up the budget? Did it really give them more leverage? I don't think so. I think it got their name on TV and they were able to deliver a blow and sort of signal to some of their supporters that they cared more about other things than the bills.
Some of the chirping we were hearing downstate when the budget did finally get into the Senate, they sort of joined for what, a couple of hours to begin those debates, and then they adjourned late Thursday and then picked it back up on Friday morning. Here we have a situation where, according to Governor Hochul, this was a conceptual agreement, right? There was agreement between her as well as Carl Heastie, the speaker, and Andrea Stewart Cousins. You have this sort of three men in a room yet again moving forward on this budget, and yet legislators said that they were surprised. This is the process that it's been this way for as long as I can remember in New York State. What was the difference this year, or is it more of the same?
I don't think anyone meant they were surprised at how the process worked. I think what happened was that the leaders agreed, and then the governor went on TV and did a press conference before members of the legislature had been briefed. And, you know, that might be a little bit out of protocol, right? They like to be able to tell their leaders they're for them before the governor says, I have a deal. So, but I think that was also, you know, after a lot of late nights and a lot of exhaustion. So I wouldn't read too much into that either way.
Budgets are always arduous. They seem to kind of really slog in Albany there at the Capitol and in both houses. But budgets during an election year, those always have kind of a special flavor. Do you think that this budget season is going to impact the governor's race here, particularly for the sitting governor and Kathy Hochul?
Absolutely. It's not just that it's an election year. It's Kathy Hochul's first budget. And I think people wanted to see how tough she was going to be. Was she going to stand up? What really are her priorities? You know, she kind of came into this a little bit of a blank slate. And so this was an opportunity for her to show what it means. But I think come the June primaries or later and the November election, you know, there's a lot in here for Kathy Hochul to run on. A lot of money for education, which we know voters care about. A lot of money for health care, which we know voters care about. Money for the bills, which we know Western New Yorkers care about. But there's also, you know, investment in Long Island. There's investment in New York City. So, you know, there's a lot here for her to run on. And I think it's a net positive, even though it was 9 days late.
And she definitely needs that support from downstate voters as well. Jack O'Donnell with O'Donnell and Associates, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.